Good evening, citizens, and welcome to another Shattersong LARP Diaries episode. Today, we're going to be talking about the Empire, and a specific part of it called Therunin. I have with me today not one, not two, but three very special guests. First of all, we've got Amber, the lovely Amber that you're used to. Secondly,
Hello.
we have got Martyn, who plays Travis Longest Path and is the former senator for Therunin.
Hello.
And then finally, we have General Razat Dancewalker, played by David Turner. And we're going to
Hello.
get all of you in one room. And I don't know if any of you at home have ever seen the. I think it's a. I don't think it's a peep show clip, but it's the. No, it is. It is. It's a Mitch and Webb look clip, and it's called like Big Issue, and they sit down and they're like, right, world hunger. How do we solve world hunger? I want answers right now from the boffins. And that is exactly what this episode is going to be about. Because I'm going to paraphrase it here, but we'll get to the details later. Therunin has been lost to the Empire. It's somewhere between fucked and giga-fucked. And we're going to try and understand how it got to that state tonight. So I think the best person to kick it off would perhaps be the former senator. Condolences, good sir. And could you explain what the current scenario is from I guess from like a politics and a mechanics standpoint, and then we'll pivot to Dave for the actual military clusterfuck, if that's all right.
Sure. So, hi, I'm Martin. I play Travis Longest Path, the former senator for Therunin. Um, so, Therunin is on the eastern side of the Empire map, and it borders one of the main enemies of the game, the Druge, who are I like to describe as the Disney villain uh, sort of faction of enemies because they are just there to be complete assholes. So they border Therunin, and they've always been a threat on Therunin's borders to different degrees over the course of the years. A couple of years ago, we reclaimed a technical region north of Therunin from the Druge, which made them extra spicy. And in recent years, the Druge have invaded into Therunin, and last summit, the Empire pulled out all their forces from the territory to leave it to the Druge to take it over. And the Druge also reawakens the Valorn that's in Therunin, and that's also now spreading, which means that in my lovely swampy territory, we've now got two major enemy factions in the region.
Fantastic. And Dave, how are we planning to deal with these enemy factions in the region?
So hi everybody. I'm David Turner-Moth. I play General Resort Dancewalker in Navarre. So been heavily kind of involved in the fall of Therunin and its aftermath we're getting into at the moment. So I guess in terms of when we're thinking about kind of what we're going to do about Therunin, it's quite interesting to see a number of different perspectives developing in the military council on Therunin, which I'll kind of briefly outline here. The first is always the age-old question in military council between West versus East. So broadly, the Western Front is against the Jotun. They are, really, really heavily, basically orc Spartans. And they're kind of pushing continuously into the Empire from the West. And that's the Marcher homeland. That is Wintermark. That is the Brass Coast. These three nations are obviously always very worried about the Jotun expansion. So it really pulls a lot of the military council's thinking into the West. There is a view that the West's war is winnable because the Jotun have a concept of honor. So the idea is if you have an honorable conflict with them, you will eventually be able to come to a negotiating table. Then you have the East, which is broadly made up of the Disney villains, as Martyn calls them, of the Druge, but also you increasingly have the issue in the south of various other kind of forces like the Grendel also popping up on the sort of southern eastern corner. So the question of what to do about the Druge is an interesting one because you've got the Western debate, which is basically the East is fucked, let it burn. That's kind of option one, and they're not really interested in what's happening in the East. The second one is more the effort by Dawn to expand, and this is something I'll come on to later in terms of when we talk about why the East is fucked. But a lot of this comes down to expansionist considerations of the Empire. Like Dawn wanted the Barons at any cost. And really, the Empire hasn't really kind of had its focus on destroying the Druge for a very long time, the kind of effort that happened prior to the current fall of Therunin really died when the Barons were taken, and that was because Dawn was like, "Cool, we've achieved what we wanted, so we're going to kind of stop and consolidate at this point." So there's a fair.
The balance is the territory north of the Therunin, so all borders. So just for context for listeners who don't know.
Thanks, Martyn. So we can definitely kind of, the Barrens is a massive territory. It's a really complicated question for Dawn as a nation because it's inhabited by lots of different tribes, and one of them are the Raven. So I know, Chris, you've spoken about in some of the other previous podcasts around the Raven and the question for Dawn. So option 2 for the military council is option 1 being fuck the East. The second option is what are we doing about what do we do about the Druge? And that's the sort of second question, which is, are we actually going to end this war? Are we actually going to push into the Druge heartlands and finish this war? And that's an interesting one, and probably my preferred one. And then the third point is really more of what the Empire does normally, which is just kind of tactical back and forth exchanging of territories. And we see this continuously throughout the game's history of an enemy invades, they take the Morn world, we push them back out, they take, they push into Rykos, we push them back out, they push into the Barons, we push them back out, and so on and so on and so on. And this certainly is the dominant view, I would say, amongst most of the players in the VAR, which is we just want Therunin back, and that's all we really care about. So those are broadly the kind of 3 options as to what do we do about the Druge invaded Therunin. Fuck it all and let it burn. Option 2, we actually get our shit together and organise the Empire to really go and exterminate and wipe out the Druge. Or option 3, we largely grind on into a kind of continuous attritional war with the Druge that doesn't really ever end.
Politically, Navarre's very interesting, sort of politically, because of this sort of situation. Because other nations, for the most part, their clump of territories are all the nation territories are all next to each other and all broadly on a specific area of the map. So, like you mentioned, the Marches are on the west, we have the Freeborn in the south, so they care about the Grendel who would like attacking from the south, and Widsmark from the north and similar. Where Navarre, because our territories are so scattered across the map, it does make our involvement when it comes to dealing with war fronts very interesting, both from a Senate political point of view, and I imagine also from military council point of view. So there is that side of it's very hard to get a strong argument about dealing with the East when the South will be very loud because Urizen and Freeborn collectively are on the southern border, and the March and similar on the west. So there's that side. And what also makes it interesting and challenging, and putting it politely, is with the nation's focus on the Valorn and how that is then translated outside of the nation, which makes it spicy, let's say.
What
I was
kind
gonna,
of? Oh, go on, Amber.
I was gonna actually ask, like, because you two have both been like a part of this plot for a long time. When did you or your characters go, oh, this is really bad? And like, what have you been doing in game to, help it or maybe worsen it?
So I've been seeing the tea leaves for pretty much since come back from COVID. Javid's realization that he's being screwed over was it spring or summer last year? No, when ironically, the season where the Druge actually crossed over the border into Therunin and started attacking was the one season I wasn't there. I
No.
was out at a wedding, so I left the nation unattended for one event, and the bad guys invaded. It was a fallout of that event because for Travid, because at that event where he wasn't there for, so there wasn't someone, because Travid is very annoyingly loud about Therunin for many reasons. But one season he wasn't there, the bad guys had invaded Therunin, and the National Assembly hadn't said anything. Senate hadn't done anything. So he sort of walked in, saw that everything's on fire, saw that the nation hadn't reacted to it, and he sort of went, well, we're buggered. And basically, what's happened over the past, I want to say year-ish,
Yeah, it's felt like a year.
it's been watching a a car crash happen in slow motion, and no matter how much hand waving and literally handing people the tools to mitigate or stop what's happening, being being ignored, is like, yeah, it's gone. So when if like the final push happened last event, should we say, is like, yeah, it was all at that point. Okay, yeah, that's kind of what we expected. If it was actually going positively, I would have been surprised, sort of thing.
Yeah, so
I guess. Go on, Chris.
it was going to be a quick one. Was that for you two's perspective, from a political and a military standpoint, it's been obvious that we were, like you said, going in a slow motion car crash. Are other members of like the military council or the Senate, are they shocked by what's happened, or has there been a almost grim acceptance that we've been outplayed on this chessboard?
Oh, we haven't been outplayed. That's the thing.
Tell me more.
So from this, so what I've been pointing out to players, I want to be careful. So I don't want to slide into sort of active IC plot. But
Oh, sorry, Martyn.
but
Just to
what?
interrupt you
Go
very
on.
quickly. Shattersong disclaimer: we are all biased, ill-informed, and highly opinionated, and everything we say should be taken with a pinch of salt. I've said it. Now go for it.
And it's the opinion of our players, not our characters, but sometimes the opinions of our characters, but not our players. So because of the actions of specifically the Navarre National Assembly, and not just in the past year or so with the Valorn button. Have you spoken about the big Valorn button
No,
in the
actually. So
past?
I've been in Varushka since
Okay.
that was
Yeah.
quite.
Okay. Cool. So about a year ago, PD basically said, guys, we're going to give you two options. Either decide now that you want to commit everything you can towards dealing with the Valorn, or continue as you're doing now. And continuing to doing now was building stuff. Like I was responsible for building the Potion Research College, which was going to create potions to help deal with the miasmas and dealing with political stuff and the diplomacy, because that sorts of stuff, which is like the slow, the methodically slow version. Or push the button and basically tell the off-screen nation that literally stop what you're doing, guys. Bear arms. We're going to attack the Valorn in the next year or two.
Yeah.
But so by putting that statement in, and to be frank, with zero plan other than pushing the button and going, we'll make it someone else's problem to fix. What that did was it killed any influence that Navarre had politically, because the message that was then sent out was Valorn cares about the Valorn, and Navarre cares about the Valorn, nothing else. That meant that when I was in meetings discussing the slow fall of Therunin, the attitude of other nations was, yeah, but it's a Druid, you don't care about the Druid, so we just let them have it.
Oof.
So it politically, the Druid's plot, or the Druid situation, could have been either stopped or at least reacted to better if the nation had reacted to it better. Because with the nation, in simplistic terms, if it doesn't have the Lord in it, they don't care. So when plot is released, if it doesn't, and it could be all about Navarre and doing some really cool stuff, but if it doesn't have, I swear to some players who just do the Control F, the search, and if it doesn't mention Blorn, they don't read it. That then means that you don't get. So we've had all these really cool opportunities that I've had players have a go at me because other nations have had, in quote marks, our plot. And the reasons why those other nations have had our plot was because I was waving my arms around going, guys, here's this really cool plot. All you got to do is put a statement in or something, and then we can play with this toy. And the players just would not engage for various reasons. And then I'll walk over to another nation and go, do you want to play with this toy? And they go, yes, please. And instantly they get that really cool plot. And so the last one was about a poison, dealing with poison. It was in Therunin, which was a really cool, about 2 hour sort of, for lack of a better term, sort of like encounter where all the apothecaries were doing really cool experimentation to try and find an antidote to a poison. And then the big finale was me taking the poison because they thought they had the antidote. And me bleeding out is when they realised they didn't have the antidote, so I had to panically fix it, otherwise I was going to die. Very funny. And that was high guard plot, because the bar weren't engaging with it for about 2 seasons.
Did you get the vibe that maybe other nations felt sort of almost betrayed by Navarre, or like,
Oh yes,
I
oh
don't
yeah,
know, yeah.
yeah, 100%. It's 100% what it is, because we've been saying for years that we're slow march for the Lorne is a slow war. We need to deal with war fronts. We need to strengthen the empire, because a strong empire gives us the tools we need to deal with the Valorm. And the reality was that narrative was only really coming out from senators and generals, because it was not coming out from National Assembly. A lot of players in the VAR, and I'm sure other nations have this problem as well, which is not unique to the VAR, but a lot of the players don't really leave the woods. They don't really engage with other nations, so it can be very easy departmentalized as they're over there.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because
So,
even with our
go on.
direct links to you guys in the VAR, right? Because we know you and we're formerly of your group. We don't see many Navarre in Varushka, but we'll see Highborn,
Yeah.
League, and Marches have come through and stop for a chat. Even Urazeni.
Yeah.
Maybe not too many from Wintermark, handful from Dawn and stuff like that as well, but it is very rare for us to see a Navarre on the streets, like the non-wooded streets of Anvil.
Yeah. So it makes the Lone War, for lack of a better term, is very easy to ignore from other nations. And to be frank, other nations shouldn't need to care, because it's the Navarre is the Valorn is very specifically a Navarre problem. Admittedly, due to Giroud silly buggers in Therunin, it's going to become Urizen and Dawn problem soon, because the way they've been working the Lord means it's actually expanding out of the Navarre territory for the first time, which is very spicy.
Will that?
I've already had.
Oh, sorry, Martyn. I've interrupted
No.
you 3 times, but
No, it's all good.
my question for that expansion, and maybe one for Dave as well, if that expansion starts to affect other territories, non-Navarre territories, do you think the attitude will shift and the Empire will get
No.
behind Navarre?
No. It'll be pushing. It'll be because all they so, and the reason why I can say that with confidence is the other nations around. So Therunin is bordered by 3 other nations. The response, and this has been the response for the past couple of seasons in different degrees, is the nations that border with Therunin are fortifying their border. So they're caring about making sure that the problems in Therunin don't spread into their territories. They're not actually interested in dealing with the problems in Therunin. So the Valorn that's spreading out loosely out of Therunin at the moment, the nations, or to be frank, the Empire will only really care about pushing them back into over the Therunin border, and then move on.
A minor correction on that, Martyn,
Okay.
which is the Valorn cannot expand beyond its current territory.
Ah,
The
no.
husks can.
Oh, that's very true. Yes, you're right there.
So the Valorn is a kind of magical ecosystem that obviously is very difficult to phys-rep, a kind of vicious fern gully / catch-hand jungle planet that wants to eat everybody. So it's mostly displayed as husks or eticaps or ents, which are really cool members of the crew on stilts. But in the game mechanics and from a military perspective, the Valorn can only expand in its original territory as an ecosystem. It's bound by the kind of rules of the magic of that territory. But its armies, in effect, the husks and the dead it reanimates, can expand as far as they want. So your point of containment is totally valid.
And for context, the Valorn is actually a really scary concept of an enemy. If you were ever a little child that got lost in a garden centre and you couldn't find your parents, remember that fear? That's what it's like with the Valorn.
Feels
The
oddly
best description-
specific.
The best description I'd have of the Valorn would be kind of, if you've seen Annihilation, that's basically it.
Or the end, or the deleted ending of Little Shop of Horrors.
Yeah. But I mean, Amber, you very briefly kind of asked, our character's involvement. My character Riz has been involved, kind of fighting the Druge for over a decade in game terms, feeling my
God.
age here. Kind of the first kind of fuffle of fights was actually fighting the Druge in Rykos. when we liberated Dal Hagon territory, which is below Therunin. And I guess kind of real efforts at the moment are trying to, as I alluded to my first kind of point, was around trying to rally the conversation and pushing the political position that we need to actually. This isn't about Therunin. This is about the Druge, right? And how do you actually win this war in its totality? And that's a very kind of Navarre view on it, which I really enjoy playing. But Navarre's view, and this kind of touches on the kind of debate that often comes up around cruel tactics and terror tactics, and so on. Navarre, and indeed Varushka. Navarre's view is basically it doesn't matter providing you win the war. Right, and that's all that matters is winning the war. You know, if Navarre was cyberpunk, it would be the one that'd be like, cool, we're developing death lasers, and we're going to use them once, and then we never have to think about them ever again because we've won. And that's kind of the whole survivalist view of Navarre, which is very much kind of you do what it needs to be done in order to win. And I think it's really interesting to kind of play around with that, both in Navarre, but also in relation to the Druge, because the Druge are not an enemy that you can really negotiate with. They are inherently sneaky by design. They are inherently going to betray you. They inherently scheme amongst themselves. They are actively using terror on their own population. They have these huge miasma towers in the lore that spread active fear and control. You know, they are basically the worst possible enemy of our orc enemies to kind of engage. But it also kind of hides the fact that the Druge fundamentally torture to create material wealth. So things like Bite, the drug, is created through the active torturing of an individual. So, and over an extended period of time. So the Druge are actively trying to look at how do you weaponize the Vlorn, how do you weaponize poisoning food, water supplies, the air, how do you kind of trap souls, how do you torture people. They're pretty much the worst end of the spectrum. But that's really interesting from an outer character perspective, because my point would be a lot of players don't want to engage with that because this is like the ultimate evil in a way. But the only real way to win against the Druge is to annihilate them, right? You can't inherently trust them by their design from the lore. But that puts players in a really difficult position because it's something we've touched on before, Chris, in other conversations around the Empire is ultimately a expansionist theocracy, right? It's the default is you convert or die to the Imperial way. And if you die, well, you'll be reborn again, so potentially an Imperial soul, so therefore it's still a win. And that's interesting from a game lore mechanic. That's exactly what the Empire is looking to do, right? So to expand the faith, to expand its control, to rule the world. But when dealing with the Druge, the only way to defeat them is a head-on, grinding conflict to annihilation, to one side left standing. And that's really difficult from a military perspective because the Druge homelands are heavily fortified. They're poisoned in some extent. They have extremely difficult control over the territories. I mentioned the Barons earlier, and they have lots of different tribes in the Barons. But the minute you remove the control of the Druge sort of state, as it were, all these different tribes actively don't want to become part of the Empire, or they actively hate each other, or they want to actively do something else. So it's really difficult to control former Druge territories. And the territories are fortified, and the Druge have poisonous armies, and the Druge use venom. So trying to, from a military perspective, trying to retake Therunin and push back into the Druge homelands and eventually wipe them out is a horrifying concept of a campaign from an in-game IC perspective, but is also incredibly difficult and very uncomfortable from an OC perspective because it is a war of annihilation.
It's why I call them the Disney villains of the enemies, because the other enemy groups, there's aspects to their flag and their design that can be engaged with. The Grendel are all about money, so but what we can do is to make ourselves too expensive to be worth attacking. The Jotun you can kind of negotiate with and things like that. The Druge by design are there to be hit. They're not there to be negotiated with or converted. They're there to be hit. And it's been a frustration for me, both in and out of character, in trying to get the nation to be frank, play their brief, because what you said there a minute ago, David, is completely right about the Navarre brief, about the fact that it's at all costs type angle. But unfortunately, on the field, it plays differently. So the one thing that Travis had to be up against for the longest time has been he's been pushing for Navarre to commit to dealing with the Druge totally, not just if they at the time if invade Therunin, not just pushing them past the border. Actually, we have to get rid of all of it. We have to rip it right out. Otherwise, they're going to keep coming. There was going to be a problem. And Trevor is up against the arguments of, well, what about the Jewish children? And we can't be nasty. And unfortunately, that's not the game is written. It's the game is played, but it's not the game is written. And that's a lot of the issues that I come across on the field is the disparity between the plot that's written, and there's aspects in the wins that dropped past couple of days that beautifully written by the plot team about actually the total fall of the Therunin. But there's aspects in that writing that is really impactful that I know that we're not going to be able to play on the field because the players on the field either will not engage with that angle or will just get upset.
This almost feels like the inevitable head-on collision with reality from groupthink, where you assume something is true, build on that foundation, but it's never been true in the first place. I think we've seen a little bit of Invarushka actually with getting rid of a cruel army. I mean, we never had the chance to because the Iron Helms took the Chad move of actually just murdering their way in the defense of Therunin.
That's great.
Yeah, we actually stood our ground and defended you as cousins. But the Empire is shifting away from cruel armies. Would actually having cruel armies help us fight the Druge?
Yeah.
Because they use fear, we should use it too.
Yeah. So there's two angles to that actually, because I like kicking the abstraction layer and trying to bring the abstraction layer to the surface on the field. Like, we're talking about the fall of Therunin. A lot of people, understandably, think about it from the perspective of how many player characters have died in a conjunction to try and defend it. Where I talk, well, Travidor talks about the tens of thousands of citizens that have died in Therunin as a consequence of the invasion or the consequence of people's actions or inaction. What was what's quite interesting from we look at this game differently point of view were the people who were celebrating the fall of the Iron Helms because cool, we've got rid of a cruel army, where Trump was kind of going, that was thousands of people.
Did that? I had no idea.
Wait, Navari was celebrating the death of the Iron Helms?
Not just
no.
No, don't say people, not just Navar. It's basically a lot of the Surod area who have been the people who have been pushing the anti-cruelty angle were celebrating it from the perspective. We got rid of a cruel army.
Oh dear,
they're people.
And these are our priests.
I think the next Varushkan army should be crueler.
Yeah, but what I find really interesting, and also interesting, I find it very frustrating, to be frank, where Navarre is a very, but as written and as presented in the plot written by PD, the game runners, is a very very blunt, very aggressive nation. No, we live in hard areas. Cruelty is a standard thing. Because we can't betray your enemy and things like that. But on the field, it's like, well, we can't be nasty. Well, we can be nasty. These people are killing your kin. What are you expecting to do? Have little knitting circles to make them change sides? Come on, guys, play the game, play the world, play the game. I've had people who play. Sorry, let me rephrase that. I've had characters who are from Therunin during the major attacks from the Druge, trying to defend the Druge to Travid. What? Because they were playing, they were looking at it from an OC angle of they don't want to play, they don't want to be the bad guys. They don't want to advocate being cruel to some bad guys. And I'm sitting going, your characters from Therunin, you've seen some shit. Would your character really think this? Or is this the player?
Can I ask a devil's advocate question?
Mm-hmm.
Let's call it a pro-Druge mentality. For what you just described, right? Just to sum it up, have there been any tangible benefits of a pro-Druge attitude, or is it just people sticking their head in the sand because they don't want to be cruel?
They don't want to be nasty. There are people who are, for whatever reason, trying to parallel a plot in a made-up fantasy world, which is all opt-in with real-world situations,
Yeah, I think me and Dave were talking about this on another episode. It seems that
and it's ridiculous.
yeah,
I'm
some
sorry.
parts of the player base
I'm
can't
sorry.
differentiate.
And yeah, and my 2 cents on that in the broader sense, if you are bringing real world situations into a fantasy world, you are devaluing what is happening in the real world. Do not do that because you're then trivializing it.
Mm.
Don't do that. What's happening in the real world is serious and needs to be treated seriously. Don't demean it by bringing it into the fantasy world where I run around in a wig and I talk to people who pretend to be trees, because then you're trivializing the real world item, and that's wrong.
Yeah, I was gonna maybe just before we shift back onto the military side of things.
Sorry.
No, because I'm interested about the cruel side of things, but it's interesting touching on that OC topic. The scuttlebutt I heard is that someone got a drink thrown on them last summit because of the Raven plot. I broadly think that's true. Have you two received any OC kickback from trying to push these agendas I see by people who just want a certain outcome and will pursue that outcome in an OC fashion?
I've had people try and project OC opinions on me. So Travid as originally designed back in the day now, way back. When did I start?
I hate to say it, mate.
2018.
I think it was like 2017 when
I think it
I
was. I
first
think it was
met you.
E1 2018.
Okay,
I
cool.
should check my. I should check my doctor's notes because my very first event was the event I broke my shoulder.
Yep.
So, but back in the day, what I did, so I was looking at the wiki, I was looking at the plot and say, oh, Navarre at the time, for plot relevant reasons, was anti Briar. And speaking to some players before my first event who were playing the sort of Briar archetype, they were saying that they kind of wanted some pushback. They wanted that sort of conflict role play. So uh, so Chavin's anti-Briar, so anti a particular archetype. Those archetypes are opt-in by players. They choose if they want to have that type of role play by choosing to have that archetype and playing in a particular nation that is very clear about the fact that they don't trust or like that archetype. So 100% opt-in. And it's as simple as that. And I had people when I was having in-character arguments with them drop out of character to call me out of character racist. And that was just insane to me because by doing that, complete rubbish, but also you're then trivializing racism, guys. No, racism's a systemic thing, driven by institutions and such. It's a huge thing. You can't just boil it down to the fact that I'm having an opt-in argument with someone who chose to put a bit of bark on their face. So I've had that sort of pushback, which is insane. But I've not had things like sort of drinks thrown at me or anything like that. But maybe I need to try harder.
Yeah, maybe that's the road for all of you in hat positions. Sorry, Dave, I spoke over you.
No, that's right, mate. I was just going to say, I think it really comes to me. It comes down to this issue cuts right across the Empire and indeed wider LARP fields, right? And I guess it comes down to like play styles. So you have a lot of different characters who want to really engage in whatever world they're playing. So an Empire, it's fantastic for people to play villains, like pick as Goldleaf, for example. I don't know, right? But fantastic, right? Playing a brilliant Disney villain. But it's also true to play expansionist senators or ultra hardcore military generals. Like I'm a huge fan of Alderaan the Fair, for example. They're an amazing role player, but also the character is incredible. But that is because these are characters designed to interact with the world as written. So these are very flawed characters in many respects. They have huge issues around, they are expansionist, but they are also very nationalist over imperialist, or they might have particular views that they don't like X nation, or they're anti-orc, or whatever it might be. And that's great because they are the characters designed deliberately to fit into that world. And they are ones who want to push a particular plot, right? And they will take the plot as it comes, right? I mean, so for example, if we look at what happened with General Griffin's Pride, whose name I've completely forgotten, and that doesn't do service.
Okay.
What happens? Arcadian, thank you. What happened with Arcadian? Like, this is someone who ultimately was like, right, I'm gonna roll this dice and I'm gonna play into this plot, and turned up out of character, knowing that the most likely outcome last event was to die. Right, realistically, that was the most likely outcome, which is also very interesting because he's doing exactly as a character what you'd expect from a Dawnage general, which is. I need this mine, I need this mithril to support the Imperial war effort. It's in a Dawnage territory. We've tried negotiation, we've tried engagement with them, we've tried converting the Raven. I'm going to go for, admittedly, an unsanctioned and unsupported, and that's obviously why he was killed, but attack on the Raven, right? And obviously hugely divided the kind of player base and indeed the characters, the Empire and the throne and so on. But the point I'm getting at is that Arcadian did that exactly playing to his interpretation of the lore as written, which is a very flawed character who made difficult decisions, a profound decision, as it were. And that's cool, because that's the game, personally, I love playing. It's dark, it's gritty, like, there's risk. Sometimes you win, sometimes you lose. Like, I've absolutely loved Empire for that. I love the stories, I love the heroism. I've had amazing highs, great victories, incredible love stories, whatever, and real sorrow, right? I mean, I've watched, some of my character's closest friends just get annihilated on the battlefield, right? Or desperately trying to hold the hand of, a character my character really loves but can't get to, right, as they're dying. These are amazing stories. That's what I love, is the story. But then the other side is that a lot of players rightly just want to come in, they just want to chill out, drink, listen to songs and stories. They want to engage with the lighter, fun elements of the game. And that's equally valid as a playstyle. I'm not demeaning them by saying that they're not engaging with the plot. They are. But they want to play a much lighter element to that. So, for example, a lot of people like Navarre because it's a relatively easy kit. You can come along, we have amazing, talented load of musicians and songs and stories. It's incredible. We have loads of, we have the amazing market area, which has loads of food and drink. You can have great stories. You can turn up, see your friends, have an amazing time, engage loosely with the plot, get on some skirmishes, get in some of the battles. And you don't really need to engage on the kind of wider debate on like nationalist versus imperialist or what the Synod is doing or whatever. You can just have a great time. And I love that about Empire. But it is very difficult when these two playstyles collide. And that's the point Martyn's getting at here, which is if you want to go the hard plot, right, you want to get into the hard element of Empire, which is like, actually, I'm really anti-Imperial position, or I'm really pro-Dornish, or I really hate the Imperial Orcs, or whatever it is, I love Briars or not. That is very jarring at times when those two sort of playstyles collide, because you've suddenly got a player who doesn't want to engage on that. And for whatever reason, they may not OC want to engage with it. They're not sure what's going on. They're new. They don't want to play in that style. But they're suddenly confronted by someone having really, 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 leaning into the darker elements of the Empire, really into the hard plot. And even it appears even in some really unsurprising places. So going back to the subject around Therunin, at the beginning of last event, there was a march in of many of the characters who had fought in Therunin, right? They're covered in blood. The Empire lost 2 armies in Therunin trying to defend it. The first was the Vrishkan army, the Unhelms. It was the last cruel army the Empire had, really, before it was changed. They were annihilated, right? A really cool write-up of their lore. The other one was Navarre's first ever purpose-built army designed to fight the Lord, that my character actually built and did a lot of the heavy lifting on and getting it created as a senator. And both of them fought the last kind of Slactor or the last Thorn and Therunin. That's an epic story. But anyway, we're a load of us kind of time in, kind of marching covered in blood. Really cool. Really cool to engage the Vrishka and the Navarre kind of characters in the field. And one of the most intense bits of moment of roleplay really stuck out to me was the military council meeting after that had happened. And Alderai walks in, this beautiful kind of like sort of the silver silver mask helmet from Gladiator that the kind of big gladiator who fights Maximus is wearing.
Yeah, it's
it's like wearing that, but black, right? And they have this incredible kind of fully armored come in, covered in blood, just drop this sort of shattered helmet on the table, and it's like, we are done. Right, like really, really like epic moment. Like 2 Imperial armies have just died to the last defending an Imperial territory. What a cool story. And you could almost see, I was kind of watching and I was like, is anyone going to react to this? Because I'd say about a third of the military council kind of looked at each other and was like, fuck, okay, like, this is big. Like, we need to really confront this slaughter head on. And then I'd probably say a third of the military council were just like, cool, well, that's not the game I want to play. I want to do this thing with my territory and whatever. And that's equally valid if that's their nationalist position. But then a third just didn't really know what to do. And they were the most interesting, I guess, of the kind of group of military council, because a third of the generals and adjutants of the tent didn't react at all. And that was quite telling to me, because I'm not sure if they just don't want to engage in that element of the game, or it's not their particular plot, but they weren't kind of, oh, I don't really care, I'm doing my thing, or they weren't kind of like, oh, wow, this is like a huge moment for the Empire. They were very much kind of just, oh, well, I don't really know what this is, and I'm not going to engage. And I guess part of the problem of the Military Council, like, it runs on an extremely tight timeline. I mean, we have a herald who try to organise this thing, and we can cover that at some other podcast. But the point I'm getting at is that this was a really, really cool story of like two armies fighting to the end to defend the people of Therunin, and it got almost no airtime in the Military Council that night on Friday, and really got very little airtime across the field outside of Varushka and Navarre, who'd obviously just lost these armies. And that's part of the politics. We can come on to in a bit about the IC politics, but from an OC perspective, I think a large element of it is that a large number of players don't want to engage with it. They don't want to engage with this dark story of sacrifice and loss, which is, to my personal view, is sad. It's really sad, because those are the best stories. Anyway,
I don't know if this is
Sorry, Samba.
just very quickly hopping on to David's point. I don't know if this is comforting in any way, but the vibes in Varushka, I don't know if it's the same for Navarre, but you can actually really feel like the loss of the army. It might not have been reflected in Military Council, but we had some sort of like rite that happened on the Saturday evening, and there's been lots of
Weaving of the
cheers
Loom.
to the Iron Helms, the weaving of the loom.
Yep.
Yeah, so like even if it hasn't exited the nation, I think there's people within the nation that are going to carry on that plot and sort of maybe fester the feeling of just not being very happy with Military Council and the way they handled it. So I think that might be some people's game still, which would be really fun.
Yeah, we've had
Say that.
there's been a few comments like for the Iron Helms, it was like, up the helms, like up the helms, kind of confident, loud, aggressive. But now it's said very bitterly. It's like up the helms or for the helms, that kind of thing. And it's kind of like it's not even a death or glory kind of thing. It's I can only describe it as Theoden's expression when he first sees the Uruk-hai at Helm's Deep. And is this all you can muster? That kind of bitterness. It's become like that, and like Amber said, it's been very cool to see how the nation's attitude has shifted, especially towards Navarre as well, because we've basically got to the point where like these are our cousins. We from our National Assembly, they fully supported you in your war against the Forlorn, and we've literally lost an army defending your territory. But it'd be interesting to ask you two actually. Has that been felt on the Navarre side? Are you guys becoming massively pro Varushka in any way?
So I was actually about to say, so what was really amazing on the Friday of last event, when we did the walk from Gods, I think it was from Gods, but it been a walk in, and we went through Varushka, and the scenes that were happening there with the sort of Navarre and Varushkan mourning the loss of the Iron Helms, and I forgot who it was who was doing all the doing the speeches, but there was no speeches. The vibe there was just immense. Both from sort of celebrating the army, but also grieving it, and then walking into Navarre. And part of it was because we were um, sort of overwhelmed, should we say, or just sort of distracted by the fact that so many of us had wounds. But the vibe in the nation was kind of insignificant. Um, so the general of the, as I understand, the army had a great speech. Don't get me wrong. The generals and the speeches and the speeches we had at the standing were great, but they were received and reacted to no differently to the statements that happen, the speeches that happen at other summits. And there wasn't really much talk in the nation about either side. The only statement that went into national assemblies about the loss of the armies was one that David put up that actually directly acknowledged the loss of an army, and that was by understand we celebrate 9 Helms. And back on David's point about the fact that there's people not wanting to engage with the rougher sides of the plot, that has a negative impact, because by not engaging with it, especially when people who don't want to engage with it have access to game mechanisms where PD, the plot writers, expect you to engage with it. By putting up statements in national assemblies or whatever to go, this is the plot. We're engaged with the plot, PD. Give us more. If you don't engage with it at all, as in like not put anything up, you kill plot. Not necessarily for you, but for other people. Putting up a nope statement instead of yes statement is still reacting, but not putting up anything at all stifles plot for other players. And when the game and how it's advertised, how it's presented on the Facebook and on the wiki, and how the plots are written in the wins, makes it clear the type of tone, the type of game that it is. And if so, people are coming in and going, no, we're we're coming because we want to play a completely different game and not engage with the game that's written. It has knock-on effects to other players. And it's just something that I'm not saying it's a bad thing or the wrong people not to want to engage with plot, but I do think that there is impacts and consequences to that I think
Yeah.
people don't understand or don't want to acknowledge.
Yeah, I've always liked the
Because
phrase, your rights end where someone else's begin. And it feels a little
yeah,
bit like that here, where you're paying to attend PD's events. Have fun.
yeah,
You're a
yeah.
customer. You should
But
enjoy it.
have fun. But have fun in PD's world.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so one thing that was been frustrating for me, and there's one reason why the Foreign Throwing happened the way it did, was the fact that players weren't wanting to engage in that plot at all. And by not engaging with it at all, not putting the same in saying they disagree with my character, or putting the statement saying they agree with it's not engaging with it at all, stifled plot for other players because they needed something to reach PD to say, yes, please, or no, thanks. So that was causing issues there. And yeah, it's just, everyone laps differently, everyone's game is different. But if you're going into a game, um, it's like you don't go in and you don't go and start playing Elden Ring and expect to be able to play The Sims.
I don't know. You can customize a lot of outfits on Elden Ring,
Yeah,
but
maybe.
but I appreciate your point. I appreciate your point. So talking of game mechanics, actually, so
Ah,
we're in this position from if I was to summarize, an anti-Valorn but maybe not strong enough anti-Druge position, and a lack of integration and cohesion with the wider empire from the Var's point
mm,
of view. It's ended up in the loss of one of your major territories. You've only got
mhm.
Hakinia and Miaran left, right?
Yes, but Meowin isn't really the VAR. It's basically Marcher. No one likes
Strong
Meowin.
take, strong take. But hey, look, being from Miaran myself, I think it was fine. Nothing wrong with it. Um, but from the Var's point of view, and I guess from your two point of view, what do we do going forward to unfuck this scenario? So I'm giving you both a magic wand where we're going to assume you've got national unity and also that the rest of the empire is actually listening. So first of all, militarily, what do we do, or what could be done, or what would have left us in a better position to actually take back, not just take back Therunin, but actually give the Druze a right good stuffing?
Can we take back Therunin? Is it even possible?
So I'm going to be deliberately controversial here and say I don't think we should. I mean, Riz certainly would, from an OC perspective, he said this very public. Taking back Therunin right now is insane
Yeah.
because it doesn't do anything to solve the underlying problem. It'll just happen again, right? And Lower Tarn Valley in Therunin, which is the sort of main sort of southeastern or eastern kind of piece of Therunin, is poisoned. Now, Martyn alluded to kind of coming up with a solution to that poisoning. The problem is that in order to deliver the antidote to that poisoning of this region of this territory of Therunin, it required Imperial armies to go in and actually hold the line to allow the apothecaries to heal it. That is currently not happening, and from a military perspective, the armies have abandoned Therunin. We can't fight in Therunin. And via a very small number of isolated pockets of Therunin, the territory is now completely in control of the Druze.
Yeah.
So this comes back to the point I was making at the beginning around these two issues, is that one argument from a lot of players, they want to retake it, and immediately, but that doesn't really solve the underlying problem. And the other one is that we actually use Therunin productively from a military perspective. And this is really interesting, where effectively Therunin offers the opportunity for it to be a sink to kind of draw the Druge into Therunin, pin them in place, and then annihilate them by pincering behind. So there is an effort at the moment being conducted by the Vrishka and a number of Dornish armies. The Urizen Citadel Guard army are trying to pincer behind Therunin into Sarengrave. And that is a view to ultimately then advancing on the Forest of Ulnak and the Salt Flats, which are both kind of Druge-controlled territories. And they are the kind of most eastern parts of the map that we know of at the moment in the game that have been vaguely mapped. And if we can take those, then we destroy the Druge. The military problem is, however, Chris, a nightmare, because the Salt Plains, the Salt Flats even have, I think, 4 fortifications in them, which are huge. They have multiple armies moving around between their territories very quickly. They certainly have the support of our Halligan, which is a Spring Eternal, who likes giving them extra poison and venomous spiders and stuff. So it's going to be really difficult. So how to do it, we have to build consensus and cohesion to fight the long war. That is interesting, and you asked a question about Vrishka and Navarre. I think certainly from a military perspective, Vrishka and Navarre are very closely aligned on a lot of this view, which is we need to do this because next it will be Ossium, or next it will be the Barons. So the kind of eastern cabal, or coven, or whatever you want to call it, of interest is really falling to Dorn, Vrishka, and Navarre, who really kind of see that we need to get this done, and we need to just accept this is going to be a long, hard, bloody road. That's the will. The tools to do it. Cruel armies are incredibly effective in the game. Broadly, the quality of a cruel army is that you will break a army, you will force an enemy's army to disband the minute they hit 1,500 troops or 2,200 troops if they're large. So the average size of an army is 5,000 or 7,500 for a large army. So basically, in conjunction with other armies, you will break the will of your opponent's army to keep fighting, and they will disband, which means that you destroy that army. So, from a purely mechanical perspective, cruel armies are incredibly overpowered and very cool. They cause a lot of in-game drama. The Wintermarkers hate them because they're not honourable. The Imperial Orcs are quietly question of them, and so on and so on and so on. But just from a mechanical perspective, cruel armies are really powerful, and it's very interesting to go into that debate around, cruel tactics. The Druge are wiping out and torturing every man, woman, person, and child in Navarre with an express glee. That's what they do. They revel in torture. So for Navarre, or indeed Vrishka, to go, we shouldn't use cruel tactics, is quite literally watching the dropping of atomic bombs over, to your territories, and then going like, well, we can't develop nuclear weapons. It's a slightly bizarre kind of thought process, but mechanically, we need to build kind of more armies, cruel or otherwise, to kind of engage into the east, and then we need to have a very clear aim, which is Therunin is a tactical battle at best. We need to win the war, which means we need to take Sarengrave, we need to then push on into the Salt Flats and the Forest of Ulnak.
Gotcha. And I vaguely remember seeing a statement around the Dance of Blood and the Navarre army, and that was meant to be cruel, right? I might have seen. Correct me if I'm wrong. Is that
on
dead?
that, no. So there was an army. I think it was before the game started, called the Dance of Blood. That was a cruel Navarre army. That we don't have. I've never seen it in play, and I think it was a pre-game start sort of army that got lost. And there are people in the nation that are saying that we want to create a cruel army because they're effective, because our main enemy fights in cruelty. Our brief is about you can't betray your enemy. Hello. What is happening is that, and I do think this is OC agendas bleeding into IC action. There is a push, an anti-cruelty push that happens. So people are putting up, and to be clear, Navarre does not have a cruel army. We do not do cruel tactics because we do not have a cruel army. And yet there is a constant push within National Assembly while we are being invaded by an enemy about not having cruel tactics. If they wanted to have the anti-cruelty conversation, the best time to do that is when we actually have an army, because when you build an army, PD will then give you some options about what do you want the attributes of that army to be. Because then, when those attributes is cruelty, then there is something to actually react to from an anti-cruelty angle. Because then you can go, well, we don't want the cruelty, we want this other option instead, and then you've got something to argue against. Where when they're putting up statements going, we don't like cruelty, I'm looking at it going, no, that has no impact. That's just irritating because you're actually going against your brief.
So
But-
shameless shout out here, by the way, to the Deadfall, the Dread Shields, the Waystone Path, etc. groups of Navarre who have the exact opposite view. They predominantly play Thorns and a few of the other archetypes in Navarre, but they are really pushing to rebuild the Dance of Blood as a cruel army, which is hella cool to see in game.
It'd be awesome.
This is maybe a naive question, but can you change the status of an army?
Yes.
Yes.
Through plot. Yes.
You did in Varushka through your own National Assembly. You were changing the Iron Helms from being cruel into dark magic, but then they were wiped out before they did it.
Is there anyone, do you know, like considering that in game, or
We don't have any cool armies.
no, just switching like their status from maybe like a not cruel army to a cool one?
You could do it. I think you'd have to mechanically. You probably would need to put something through the national. Yeah, you have to do national or then do General Assembly. Kind of the view on magic being able to do it. PD pretty clearly said that you can't use magic to convince like 5,000 soldiers of your army to just suddenly change how they're going to fight. You have to do it through this synod.
Yeah.
So when you talk about Deadfall, Dread Shields, Waystone Path, objectively based groups, by the way, we met up with them when we were murking last summit, and obviously I've known them for years, and they're absolutely wicked to fight with. What's happening? Because it sounds like you've got Thorns pushing for this cruel army, and then the priests that are meant to, the guides which are meant to represent the Thorns, right, are saying you could argue the complete opposite. Where's this breakdown in communication coming from?
It's players who want to play nice and are not willing to actually do the work that is involved in that area of the game that they want to engage in. There are people who are pushing their own agendas without actually understanding that the area of the game that they're engaging in is designed to be you go and talk to the other players and get them to agree with you before you put the statement in. So that's why Navarre National Assembly, and I'm sure other assemblies have a similar issue, but Navarre National Assembly is so detached from the rest of the player base of the nation because they sit in their own little bubble, saying do whatever they want. They don't get the consequences of their actions. And there's one thing I wanted to go back to when you talk about what we do now from a political side of things. The fact that the National Assembly pushed the Valorn button decimated the political influence of the nation outside the woods. But the people who push that button are not going to see the consequences of that action. So that's what you see a lot when it comes to these things, is the people who put up a statement or do a thing are then the ones that see the consequences of it. Because that's what happens. From this thing brought to now about China, we came to Therunin, as David said, and I totally agree. Therunin's lost because the opportunity cost, as in the cost of getting armies and such in there to deal with the threats, is too high. The Empire can't afford it. The cost of holding it is too high. The cost of rebuilding it is too high. And then we're going to do it all over again when we do the Valorn plot. So Therunin is lost. The Navarre itself is a wet flannel of a nation when it comes to our influence in Senate, because we only have 2 senators, but we are held back by the actions of our National Assembly, by the fact that we did not get an army slot last summit. One of the main arguments for that, and why it went to another nation. So you guys bossed it by fully funding your army, so it meant you didn't need a slot. You just kind of had it. Where it was League versus Navarre regarding getting an army slot, and the army slot means that we can build an army, and also we'll have access to some funding from Senate. The main argument that was used by multiple nations about why the Senate should support the League option was the fact that Navarre are just going to waste it by throwing it at the Valorn.
Oof.
So because we have so many war fronts, and that's some things, but because the nation has, through pushing the Valorn button, have basically gone, yeah, we don't care about anything else. even if that's not the intent that people, the message they thought they were saying, that's a message that was being heard by other nations, means that politically we're irrelevant, because why should people care about our views? We're currently trying to create another war front when we're already overstretched and we've just declared a religious war on a foreign nation. Politically, we're irrelevant because we've now only got two armies, kind of 1.5, because you guys have got our other one at the moment. So there's that angle. The what we do now element, and is, to be frank, Iran need to understand the damage that they have caused and reverse course. I personally think that they should be putting up a statement going, pushing the button was a mistake. We need to deal with the threats that are actively in front of us and dedicate our time and effort on those, aka dealing with the Druge properly, closing fronts, because by doing that, that then allows us to then refocus on the Valor.
Yeah,
Economically, we're a joke. So we need to find a way, because it doesn't help the fact that, Therunin was the economic heart of the nation. And we've now lost a lot of our money makers. So
your
we
herbs,
spend
right?
ways
There's many
because
herb gardens in Therunin.
herb gardens. We had the boar seat in Therunin, which
Oh
gave us free
shit!
rearward.
Yeah,
We've lost that. I'm expecting the next summit or two, the stuff that was done in Therunin that boosts rearward production in other boar seats. I'm expecting that to start depleting. We have potion research stuff. There's a lot of stuff in
the
Therunin.
Great
That's
Library,
one thing.
didn't you?
The,
Library of
we,
Hycenium.
we, no, that's up in Hercynia.
Oh, okay, cool. That's still
But
safe. Good.
no, we had potion research, we had magic medical, we had, had lots of cool stuff in Therunin that we've sadly lost. That's the nature of the plot. But that means that economically we're a bankrupt nation. We can't fund our own armies. Yeah, that was the situation before they pushed the button. So there's a lot of it has been the button was pushed by people who were then expecting other people to magically fix the problems. And what's happened is that those people have gone, well, how? You've burnt every bridge by doing that statement. How are you expecting us to fix this? So I think what they do now is we should be using what happened to Therunin as a wake-up call to go, oh, we did an oopsie, and do what we can to walk it back, deal with the plot-related consequences, and start rebuilding our political and military relationships with other nations by fighting alongside them, by closing fronts, by supporting other nations' ambitions. So when the time comes where we actually can deal with the Valorn, then we'll then actually have allies alongside us, because at the moment we don't have any.
Yeah, I think the.
Is that both your?
Oh, go on, Amber.
Just gonna say, is that both your OC and IC opinion?
Yes.
Nice.
a statement was put in blindly because people did not want to sit down and understand that the game itself. They said, "Oh, it says Valorn, we'll push the button." Rather than going on, hang on, what's the impact going to be in the game? How am I, as a player, going to interact with that? What happened is the people who pushed that button then be spending the next year or so patting themselves on the back because they don't care or don't feel it's their problem to fix, because they did the good thing by pushing the button.
Well, that is a
And to be fair,
sterling and damning summary.
yeah, and the reason I'm a bit sorry about that is that consequence of that action killed so much plot for so many players. Because by pushing that button, it killed the economic game in the nation. That is now a shadow of what it is, and it was a joke beforehand. It killed a lot of international relations that people were playing. After that button got pushed, and I came into the field the following event, because I wasn't there when that button was pushed. I had players coming up to me asking what they do now because their plot had just been nerfed. That's where I'm coming from. So a little bit salty from that perspective.
Yeah, so from what I've gathered from the two of you is that militarily, I think the quote was nightmarish, politically irrelevant, and financially broke, destitute.
What's further than that?
Bankrupt.
Yeah. I mean, I won't. I think this is David's OC opinion rather than Riz's. I think Riz is very much more like we need to fight the Valorn, and I think it's much more kind of like, perhaps not today, but certainly we need to do it within his lifetime. So perhaps there's a different view from Travid on that. But I think there was a really great quote where someone exactly summed up what sort of Martyn was alluding to there, where Rez was in a conversation with the throne, a number of generals, a number of senators, and I won't kind of name exactly who said this, but Chatham House rules kind of vibe. There was a great summary where someone said, "All you ask of the Empire is sacrifice for a war that we have had to live with for thousands of years that we can contain. We are facing annihilation on both fronts at the moment, and the Empire is going economically bankrupt. You are asking us to fight another war when we have not closed any of the others. You are economically bankrupt. You have little sway politically. You have two armies, having just lost a third, and you have little sway in the Senate, in the Synod. So what do you bring to the Empire to ask us to fight this war now?" And that's the interesting kind of summary. I think really good summary of kind of what Martyn's point is, which is Navarre has to really think how it does this, and I think that's a really interesting inflection point. But a lot of I would say a lot of the players who view that the war against the Valorn will be won without doing anything, and in reality, from a strict military perspective, right? I mean, we're talking the military strength of the Valorn in Broceliande, I think, is somewhere north of 70,000 troops, right? Now, to put that into perspective, the
14
normal number
armies?
of right. And so, we currently have 4 or 5 armies engaging to Sarangrove. I can't remember the exact numbers, but that is considered a major military push. 14 armies pushing into Broceliande means we would have to basically abandon one entire front line and basically strip the other down to bare bones. And that means that there's nothing in reserve to fight the Grendel. There's nothing in reserve to fight the Cold Sun. There's nothing to fight the Thule or any other magical type entity that appears. So in order to get the consensus on the field to destroy the Valorn, which you have to awaken all of Valorn, so that's 70,000 in Broceliande, 25,000 I think in Akinia, something similar in Therunin, etc. You'd have to have 25, 30 Imperial armies, all of which are able to engage pretty quickly against the Valorn, because you need to destroy them quickly, because they will otherwise, every casualty you take gets added to the Valorn, because they reanimate the dead. You need to be able to do that with overwhelming force, and to build the consensus to do that, I don't think I highly doubt if it's actually achievable within the next 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe even 10 years of the game in outer character time, because it's just that is to build that consensus to go, guys, you're going to lose all your homeland on the west. We're going to lose the Brass Coast, we're going to lose the marches. But by the way, I need all your armies to march to Broceliande to destroy Broceliande now. Isn't going to happen. So Martyn's hit the nail on the head, which is we kind of smash the button with a hammer, repeatedly going like, let's kill the Valorn. But mechanically, to destroy the Valorn is going to be really, really difficult, even if the Empire was not engaged on 2 fronts already, potentially a third against the Grendel, potentially a fourth against the Thule. So it's not mechanically viable in the next coming couple of years. So basically, we need to close another front to then free up the resources to stabilize the other front or to deal with any other threats, to then get to the thing in the inbox that says Forlorn. And that's a really difficult thing to actually sell, how you mechanically would do it.
And what's frustrating was we were kind of doing that before the button got pushed, because like generals were making deals with other generals about dealing with, you scratch my back, I scratch yours type angle regarding armies. There was work happening within the Senate structure to build up those reputations, to build up that support, and then National Assembly pushed a button to go, actually, bugger you guys, it's the Valorn or nothing, it's a Valorn above all, and that then just killed everything, because people went, well, what's the point? Why would we support what you want to do? Because all you're going to do is go and throw it into the miasma, when I'm more worried about Jotun or side of things. And so yeah, that's what I'm sort of sitting with it.
Yeah, and maybe
Is we were doing the work was doing the multiple players were doing a lot of work on building the support, doing the diplomacy and the economic side of things to build the support to get the tool to deal with the Valorn. And unfortunately, the action of pushing that button without actually engaging with the plot properly, because that button was pushed at the very beginning of that event. It did not allow for debate or discussion. The players just went, okay, push. It just killed all that work.
Yeah, with that in mind, I actually want to move on to my final question slash closing statements of the evening. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember in the wind that announced, this great battle, this crusade against the Forlorn.
Mm.
I remember at the bottom of it, there were words to the effect of, "If Navarre do not meaningfully attack the Forlorn, this will have dire consequences for the nation." And from what we've
No.
discussed so far tonight, right? It sounds like we're not going to achieve that. What do you think happens? What are those dire consequences?
So the wording of it, and I don't have it open, I'm doing this from memory, so please forgive me, was the options were Forlorn above all, or continue as you are. If you choose continue as you are, citizens and off screen abstraction layer citizens will be disappointed but will understand the reason why. It wasn't going to be there's going to be uprisings or anything like that. It was just the NPCs would be disappointed. So there might be there might be a little bit of plot about it where we talk to some NPCs about uh you know about why we're sticking on the path we're on. You know what I mean? But it wasn't going to be like a civil war. It was sold as that, I can understand it, by players when that event by characters, pardon me, at the event when the button was pushed, but that was not what was written by the plot team. The plot team was going, do you want to push the button or do you want to continue as you are? If you push the button, you'll be able to have more armies. No way to fund them, but you'll have more armies. If you don't push the button, some NPCs will be disappointed, but will understand why you chose not to. Unfortunately, now the consequences of this, by walking back on pushing the button, allows for there to be some NPC pushback, by people being, off-screen Navari being upset, going, "But you said we were going to do it." And that's going to be some fun plot. If the nation looks at what's happened, looks at the impact of their actions, and goes, "Actually, we done an oopsie. We want to attempt to roll it back." There will be some really fun plot dealing with the consequences of their actions. And that's the game. Um, but yeah, on the wind itself, it wasn't. If you don't do it,
Oh, okay, yeah, damn it, I've misremembered that. Well, that was less dramatic than I wanted it to be.
but the thing is, it can be dramatic now.
Oh,
By
here we go. I
walking it
found it.
back.
Your darkened
Oh, what's that?
land.
What's that?
There will be a catastrophic loss of confidence in the leadership of Navarre if neither mandate is passed. Oh, okay.
If
Oh, that's not the same. Damn it.
That's important. That was the bit that was which my understanding was deliberately misrepresented. It was if you didn't choose one of the two options, which was push the button, so Forlorn above all, or we're continuing as we are.
Shame.
But with the continuing as you are one, it would have been. It was along the lines of people would be disappointed, but understand why the leaders made that choice type of narrative.
Oh, gotcha. So I suppose if they're going to be livid if no decision was made.
Yeah.
I wonder if they'll be just as livid if no progress is made, or like you suggested earlier, the mature thing would be to rescind that promise to the nation. But...
Yeah, and the NPCs will understand it, then be livid because we're rolling it back, but that creates some fun plot.
Yeah, my take on it would be different. I mean, there's definitely going to be an interesting kind of plot arc narrative coming out of this, but I'd say Navarre by design is a nation about sacrifice, right? And it's really thematically cool to have this kind of thing of like, we really wanted to kind of finally come to the end of this kind of great cycle of sacrifice. And there's a huge question about where does Navarre go? What happens to Navarre when the Forlorn end, which is super interesting in its own right. But it's also kind of cool for there to be this like existential thing of like, what do we do now? Do we fight the Forlorn? In which case, we will probably lose a lot. A lot of people will die for not necessarily achieving an aim. Navarre, does Navarre remain in the Empire? Is that the right mechanism to achieve victory over the Forlorn? How does it build consensus to fight the Forlorn? Is that Imperial? Is that Su? Is that Druge? Is that Jotun? Whatever it might be, right? There's some interesting kind of angles to that. And then the final point would be where, it's really cool narratively to sort of say that Navarre is having to choose between losing its people and its family now, does that matter less or more than winning the war of the long game? And I think, interestingly, Navarre are the only nation that anyone can join by oath. The only thing that makes Navari is oath, right? And that's super interesting as a nation. There's no like Scops or anything in Navarre. So Scops are kind of in Wittermonk, they kind of record your story. In Navarre, everyone makes their own story, but it's a choice that makes it super cool to be Navari, which is they are characters are choosing to be Navari by the oath they take. So if they don't feel that they can follow that oath to fight the Valorn, or they're not going to be able to achieve it, then they can ultimately unburden themselves at, say, the spring equinox, which is what Navarre does every year in its spring kind of festival. Is you unburden yourself of oaths you can no longer make. And I think there's a super cool question there about if a character or an NPC decides that they cannot meaningfully contribute to the war against the Valorn, do they wish to remain Navari? Or is it more Navari to fight the immediate fight now, which means more of their family, their brothers, their cousins, their kin will die fighting the, because of the Druge or anybody else? Is that more important than the Valorn? And that's a super cool, interesting question around loyalty, but it's also very Navari and really adds to the story.
Fantastic. I totally agree. I think that's a question of will Navarre cease to be Navarre if they fail? What a shocking and
Bombshell to-
horrifying thought to maybe to bring this to a close, because we are at the 1 hour, 16 minutes and 10-second mark. Thank you very much, dear listeners,
Pleasure.
for listening to the two bright, sharpest thorns, we could say, of the nation. Sharpest citizens. Talk us through. Thank you both so much for walking us both through that from like a Navari perspective, right? Because we all see it from the outside, but it's really cool to see it from the inside, from the people making those decisions. For those of you listening at home, thank you for spending your time listening to the woes of Navarre, and maybe it's something you can take into your own mind and your own heart is what does it mean to be Navari, and if you're not, or what can you do to help Navarre in this dire state? Hopefully we'll be able to cover this topic a little bit more, maybe after E2, guys. You game?
Yeah, sure.
Fantastic.
Always,
All right, well, thank you very much, everyone, and we'll catch you on the next episode. Goodbye.
you guys see.
Bye.
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 Bye.